Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I'm your host, Alan Moore, and thank you so much for joining me today. Today's episode is an interview with Stephen Alfred, owner of Ignite Financial in Atlanta, one of the few XYPN members and firm owners that's actually younger than me. Stephen launched his own firm just a few minutes ago, but after chatting with him over coffee, I realized what an amazing story he has to tell. Stephen really is a rags to riches success story. He came from extremely humble beginnings, and thanks to the hard work of his mother and a lot of self-fortitude, he's really built himself up into an entrepreneur that's doing what it takes to be successful. Stephen talks about his career path and some of the things he learned along the way that led him to starting his own firm. And he also talked about how his old firm tried the entrepreneur model that Matt Kosriff talked about in episode 35 and why it failed at his firm, but it did allow him to launch a firm much earlier than he expected. Stephen is just an awesome example of do what it takes to build a business that supports your great life. So I know you're going to love this interview and this entire episode. As always, you can check out the show notes and additional resources that we mentioned on the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/57. And also be sure to sign up for our VIP group at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP, where you'll be able to sign up for an Ask Me Anything webinar with Michael Kitsis, where you can literally ask him anything you want, but it's only available to our VIP members. So without further ado, here's my interview with Stephen. Hey, Stephen, thanks so much for taking the time to be on, man. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. Thanks for letting me on, and hope I can provide value to all the listeners out there.
No, we only bring people on we think provide no value. That's my level of evaluation of guests. No, so you and I had coffee just a couple of weeks ago when you were visiting Bozeman, Montana, and I had known your name and we had, I guess, interacted somewhat through the network and the VIP group. But it was awesome to hear your story and just hear some of the things you're working on and kind of how you view the world, which is from the eyes of our youngest ever guest, I believe.
Yes.
And so we'll give you that. And I believe probably the youngest member of the XY Planning Network. We finally have a couple people younger than myself. But yeah, you view the world differently, actually very similarly to how I do in terms of just how things are changing. So I'm just excited to hear your story and then have a conversation around kind of how things are changing in the world, especially when it comes to technology, as well as how that's going to affect financial planning. So as usual, let's just go back and talk about how did you get into financial planning? I mean, kind of what's your backstory and how did you find this career?
All right. I'll try to say this as succinctly and articulate as possible. So I started off in college as an engineering major. I realized that I couldn't do that because I went to a pre-engineering camp, if you will, and they asked me to do a question of a pole is this tall and a shadow that it casts in a field is this long. So what time of day it is, AM or PM? And it took me 14 hours to figure out the problem. Everyone else did it in 4. And I realized that engineering probably wasn't the best way to go about my life. And so I went to a barbershop in my hometown of Franklin, Tennessee, and I met a mortgage investment banker, which I don't even know if they really exist anymore in the Southeast. But he gave me advice of, hey, I heard your story. You should probably read these magazines every day. Read them every day. And that was CNN Money, that was Forbes, and I believe either Success or CNBC. I'm not sure. Maybe it was all of them. So for a while, I read all of those magazines every day, every morning, and learned more about personal finance and business. And then I got an opportunity. My best friend at the time, her dad was a VP at Dave Ramsey's company, which is now Ramsey Solutions, but back then it was the Lampo Group. And he allowed me to come on board as a temp. In my mind, I was an intern, but he gave me so much leeway and room to learn and figure out what business is and what personal finance is. So I helped the marketing staff run the moderation for the forums, which are really, really active. I helped do research into the first iPhone app that they ever had. That was fun because I basically got carte blanche to download all of these apps and figure out how to really put together a good software product as far as this is what our goal is and how can we reverse engineer that feature by feature to make it so that it still has that Dave Ramsey feel around it. And now the iPhone app is amazing, but the research that I did helped with that. And my boss gave me Fridays off to read a book and then turn in a book report. So I had 8 hours to read a book. So that taught me how to read quickly and
and
provide.
I've never heard of that one before.
Yeah. It was, I mean, I thought of doing that for some of my interns when I start hiring out and building my staff, is doing that same thing, because I was reading books quickly, but also it was the sheer amount of books that I was reading that I was never exposed to either in college or just through my upbringing. And so he also let me go through the financial coaching course. So I met up with Chris Hogan, who's the wealth coach there. Shout out to Chris. He just launched a new book called Retire Inspired. So I went through that course. Everyone there, I was 19 at the time, said I had a knack for really empathizing with people. And through all the role plays, I kind of stood out as someone who just got it, quote unquote. And after that, I figured, okay, I might be able to do this on my own. And so I launched a financial coaching business at 19 after interning there for about 8 months, and had just switched my major to finance and with a minor in marketing and entrepreneurship, and realized that if you want to do financial planning, there's red tape involved.
A lot of it.
As a college student, I was bushy-eyed and, naive is a very kind word to say, but I thought I could just do investment management and help people with money. And then I started researching the legal part of that and realized, oh no, I can't do that. And so I eventually just ended up doing consulting for small business owners, helping them with recognizing their balance sheet and how to use the capital that they have in order to purchase new assets and depreciation and all those fun, not so fun really terms of financial planning from a corporate standpoint. I was just taking literally all the information that I was gaining from my college courses, turning around, and I was a terrible student because I would turn around, not do my homework, and apply everything I learned that day to my clients.
So you're doing all this while in college. Where were you in school at?
I was at the University of Tennessee.
What city is Tennessee in?
Knoxville.
There we go. So I didn't know this. I don't know how I keep ending up with like Florida fans and Tennessee fans on this show. Great episode, 7 minutes in. So we're going to close this out.
Yeah. I mean, it's good. We're totally going to beat y'all this year. So if you want to grab a beer and I can console you and, kind of help you, be a shoulder for you to cry on. Is really.
For anybody not aware, football in the SEC in the Southeastern Conference is pretty much why we went to college and why many of us stayed for grad school. Was like 2 more years of football. Yeah, I'll take it. But, if we ever get a quarterback, we'll be back on the wagon. But
that's what everyone says all over the world.
I know. Isn't it great? Heaven forbid Alabama get a decent quarterback, or Florida.
Oh, gosh.
That'll be the end of the conference. So why were you doing all this work in college? I mean, you just loved it? You couldn't sit still? Was it just to make some money? I was drinking my way through college when I was this age.
100% couldn't sit still.
All right. Well, and college is kind of boring. I mean, for somebody who can't sit still, there's a lot of downtime.
And unfortunately, my mind only works in a way that I can get really, really awesome at things when I care about them. If I don't care about them, I'm going to do terrible. So all of the courses that had nothing to do with finance or financial planning or getting me closer to my career, I was very clear on what I wanted to do eventually. And so anything that wouldn't get me there, it was almost like dead space in terms of my time requirements. And so that it kind of shifted. And that's why I was such a terrible student. And I regret it now, looking back, because my fiance, she got straight A's in graduate school, straight A's in college, and straight A's in high school. So she's an academic through and through. And now looking back on it, some of the opportunities that I wasn't able to take advantage of happened because I wasn't paying attention in college. And so my grade point average is down. That's also another reason why I started my company, is because no one was willing. It kind of comes from my upbringing. No one was willing to give me a chance. And I kept writing my cover letters and kept killing interviews, but still the GPA was holding me back. So I thought, well, if no one's going to give me a chance to get work experience and I need work experience to get my first job, then I guess I'm going to have to give myself my own work experience. And that's where the company kind of started from.
That's incredible. You mentioned a little bit about your upbringing, which we talked briefly about, but I mean, what do you mean by, you mentioned since your upbringing, people haven't been willing to give you a chance. Kind of what's your background? Kind of where did you come from?
Well, I came from a single parent home, which is interesting because a lot of people that I know as adults don't realize that there was a very low income area of Franklin, Tennessee, which is in Williamson County, which when I was growing up was one of the top 10 to 15 richest counties in America. But they had some parts that even people who grew up there didn't even know about. And so I was from a low income family, and my mom, she didn't graduate college, but she was a straight A student in high school, and school came easy to her. And so none of my family members had ever been through and finished college. And so her goal was, okay, I'm going to line everything up for you so that you will go through and finish college. You'll be the first one in our family, and you need to do this. So she took on 2 or 3 jobs when I was in high school. She made sure that I never went to public school. That was like a very strong opinion of hers, is I've been through the public school system, so I want you to have the best chance that you can possibly have to get through college. And so I feel like private school is going to prepare you the best in order to face everything that's going to hit you in college. And that comes from social pressures to academic requirements to extracurricular activities. Everything was about making sure that nothing would distract me from the end goal of me graduating college. And so my upbringing was being on kind of one side of town and then having to drive to the other side, which is the richest area in probably all of Tennessee, called Brentwood, and go to school there at a private school called Brentwood Academy, and then proceed to learn all of the tools that would be required of me and then take them back. And so a lot of my friends made fun of me because I went to private school and, we thought we were better than everyone. But really, it was my mom's just a super strong woman, and she had this vision of what I could be. And luckily, I was fortunate enough that things were kind of put in my path that I was able to overcome obstacles and still get to the point where I am today, which is on your podcast. It's kind of surreal to think about.
Shout out to mom, man. Yeah, it's crazy what parents will do for their kids, and I'm not sure I realized it until I became a parent, when you realize just what all you're willing to give up. But it sounds like your mom, she didn't just say what she wanted you to do. She bent over backwards to make it happen. So,
oh, yes, definitely.
Shout out to mom for doing what it took, and shout out to you for taking advantage of the opportunity in front of you. And I think that, it takes both sides of it. So, all right. So looping back just a little bit, you worked at Dave Ramsey, and first off, I'll say that, Dave Ramsey and I have actually personally gotten into a little bit of Twitter battle before, but I will say that, his program, he's a marketing machine. I think they help a ton of people. Like, he and I could argue about, their investment returns, but whatever,
oh, yeah.
It's math. But ultimately, like, if you want to learn how to market, Dave Ramsey is somebody to learn from that entire program. But, I'd be interested to know what all that experience kind of gave you and led, kind of into, as you're starting your own firm and doing all this other work, how much that helped you.
Well, the best part about what you just said right there is that I worked for the VP of Internet Business. So this guy had come into Dave Ramsey's organization and said, hey, you should start a website, and people will pay you to interact with each other about stuff that you have already said. And as the story goes, like, Dave was like, yeah, right, that's not going to happen. So my boss went into it thinking, like, I know what's going to happen. I know that people will enjoy this, and I know that we can leverage this in order to do more things. So yeah, what I interned in the internet business part. So learning how to interact with forums, learning how to build trust with people on a very short attention span in a very short amount of time. So that's definitely something that helped me, is to be able to go into the forums, establish trust with people, and then be able to provide value with barely any background or context. Also, just knowing how to innovate that's something that is very big for me, and what I want for my firm as I build a culture into the firm is the desire to innovate and not believe that what got you here is going to get you there. And that's a big thing in startup culture, is to realize that kind of what investment returns are. Like, past performances does not indicate future performances. And I feel like a lot of people, especially in our industry, are stagnant, and then they get caught flat-footed when an innovation comes along, like a Betterment or a Wealthfront or a awesome CRM. I think they get caught flat-footed, and then they get hit in the mouth, and the market tells them what you're offering is no longer valuable. You can no longer charge 1% for this. And then they're like, oh, well, what do I do now? I'm just going to retire, And it's kind of that mentality of always be innovating, always be looking for extra things. And that's why I add and test out tools all the time on a weekly basis. I call it Product Hunt Sunday. I get on a product hunt and I find out the new innovations that are coming out in the tech side of things to see if I can integrate them into my practice, either in the future or if I can use them to help someone else integrate their practice in the future, or just kind of being on the cutting edge of things is what that experience taught me. Because I believe that if you can up the client service and up the client experience, then your firm will start to market for yourself on top of the marketing that you're already doing.
I love it. I'm going to loop back to this part. I want to hear about how you've actually kind of gone through the process and started your firm and some of the other things you're working on. But I'm going to loop back on this conversation around being willing to make changes in financial planning, because I couldn't agree with you more. So, all right. So you start your financial coaching business. You realize all the red tape that's out there. You can't just tell people, what to invest in without being under some regulatory oversight.
Yeah.
So you said you transitioned into doing some business coaching. Like, where were you finding your clients as a college kid?
So it's just from learning what I learned at Dave Ramsey, really. I would go into forums all over. I would just spend time and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. I'm talking like, in addition to classwork and part-time work, I would probably be working 14 to 16 hours a day. And then during the summer, I would ratchet it up to about 18 hours a day, just going through forums and asking questions, or answering questions, and answering questions and answering questions and answering questions. And I mean, like, to most people, that would be mind-bending work. But what happened is that if you provide enough value for free, people will want to know what more you got. And so they will question you and send you private messages and say, hey, I actually need help with this too. Is there any way that you can work on that? And I'd say, sure. Well, I'll charge you this much money. And eventually it got to the point where we started a global international Skype group, which is so weird to think about, where it was just a bunch of young, hungry entrepreneurs around the world that would hop onto Skype. And since Skype was limited in the video conversations that you could have back then, it didn't limit the text conversations. So we would just help each other through, like, taking pictures and saying, hey, no, you need to move that here, or hey, that marketing plan isn't going to work, or things of that sort. And yeah, it just kind of like built upon itself. And I ended up running that for a couple of years until I almost failed out of college. And my mom went, okay, you got to close this down. Like, that's the end of that. You still have to finish college. I know you're having fun and you're making a little bit of money and you're being successful, but college is the end goal. So you got to stop it.
All right. So then did you just stop all the work altogether and just kind of shift over to finishing up school?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I just kind of released the reins. If there were any referrals to be made, I kind of sent them on their way, because again, back then, there weren't very many people doing virtual, like, Skype meetings with people on a professional level. One, because the internet really wasn't at the place where it could be done as far as connections and speeds. But two, because it's just hard to get clients that way, and it took a lot of work to do that. And so, yeah, I just kind of whittled it down piece by piece, and then I just kind of closed it off very quietly. It wasn't a big blowing up of an enterprise. It was just kind of not taking on new clients, stop posting on the forums, turning over the Skype group to someone else. That's kind of how I wound down that period of life.
So then what was next? So you graduate college then and kind of shift into your first job?
Yeah, I graduated college. I went to work for a pretty large insurance firm. I've noticed that people don't name check on here, so I'm gonna try to stay PC. I went to this large insurance firm, and in my mind, I knew from the time that I was 6 months into my first business, I called it Cloud9 Financial Consulting. From 6 months into that business, I knew that I needed my Series 65 in order to do what I really wanted to do. And I just had to find a way to get it. And so I didn't realize at the time that you can just pay to take the test and then you can start going through the process of setting up compliance and registering with the state. I did not know about that. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have a job, get my Series 65, and then see what I can do after that. Well, I knew through all of my interviewing before college ended, I knew that I needed to find a place that would pay for my Series 65 or Series 7 or 63, whichever security license that they required. I knew that I needed someone to pay for that, but I also needed someone to take me seriously. And so a large insurance company recruited me through another connection of mine. I thought it'd be a good fit. They said, oh yeah, you just need to complete the internship part of this. So the first 90 days, I think, until you sold 10 policies was the internship program. And so you can take your investment license as soon as possible. It's like, okay, cool. I'll sign on dotted lines. There was no income. It was straight eat what you kill. And I signed on, and then they told me, oh wait, you have to sell 10 policies first. So I figured out a way to sell 10 policies because my heart wasn't into it. And then they're like, no, you need to sell 25 now in order to get your investment license. And I go, okay, that's a little weird, but I'll try. And so during this process, I had learned how to cold call. I learned cold emailing. I learned how to network. I was going to something like 7 to 10 networking events a week. And so I had learned all of these things as an introvert, how to be extroverted, because it was you either sell insurance policies or you don't eat. And so luckily my parents were in Nashville and I moved back home at the time. And so I could live with them and have free rent, but it still weighed on me. One, the things that I was having to sell to people who weren't really in the position to buy, but also two, the thing that worried me was sometimes the insurance product was more expensive than a competing product, but they offered the same ability. But if I were to sell them the competing product that would be better suited for them and within their budget, then it wouldn't count towards my goal of getting 25 insurance policies sold, which means that it wouldn't really help my goal of getting my investment licenses. Once that kind of started being clear to me, at the end of the day, the next year I started zero all over again. I began to wonder, okay, is this a good fit for me? Because I don't feel comfortable selling people insurance policies that I don't believe in, especially at the cost that's not suitable for them. Like if something's 50% cheaper and I sell them the product, they should reward me for being someone of integrity. And so to kind of force me into selling something that was more expensive, that had more fees, yeah, it was more commissions, but I started my whole career on being more values and more creating value for other people. It just really didn't jive with me.
Makes sense. You want to do both, right? Like,
yeah,
we're not trying to run charities here. Like, I'm a huge supporter of charities, but we don't start businesses to give our services away for free. So you should make money. But when given the choice between, product A or product B, and A is the best one for the client, but B pays a heck of a lot more and counts towards your quota.
Yeah.
Which one are you going to sell? And, a lot of people just end up selling B blindly because the folks that sell A end up having to get out of the business because you're not going to have much of a career if you're selling the products they don't want you to sell. So,
yeah.
So did that then lead to another job, or is that when you decided to make the leap into doing your own thing?
That led into another job. So the next job, it's so interesting. The next job, I went in and I told them exactly what I wanted, and they were willing to accommodate me. And the person who worked there, she was about to have her second child under 2. And I thought, okay, if she's a partner and she's running kind of the planning, then I can probably take over her role as soon as I get in. Like once she trains me, she'll leave. There's no way she's going to stay. And so I thought, okay, well, I can negotiate all these things. My series licensing, I wanted to get paid more, obviously. And They said, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, the red flag there was that none of the owners were in any of the negotiation meetings. And so when she left and then they fired another girl, I had the responsibility of 3 roles that I hadn't been trained on, or I had been trained on one. So I had the responsibility of 3 roles, but I only knew how to do one. And they weren't going to up my pay. They wanted me to stay later. I was on salary and they still weren't going to give me my securities licenses so I could go into holistic financial planning. And so that kind of reared its ugly head. And I was like, okay, maybe this isn't a good place for me. Well, luckily for me, the point came where my fiance moved from Nashville to Georgia to start graduate school. And then they started asking more questions like, are you going to leave? Are you going to quit? What are you going to do? And that's when I started having conversations with my fiance, and she suggested I apply for jobs in Atlanta because either I was going to have to quit or they were going to fire me. And they ended up firing me from that job because I wasn't able to get my core responsibilities done, which is what they hired me for. But I was doing insurance underwriting. I was doing case management for the insurance side. I was supporting on the retirement planning side, and then I was doing paraplanning as well.
So a little bit of everything.
Yeah. I mean, it was great for experience.
Sure.
Not so great if you are a 24-year-old who wants to, experience life and eventually get to a point where you can still be networking and still be building up your connections and your network. It just wasn't conducive to really being young and being able to go out and meet people.
Makes sense. So what was next then once you started looking in Atlanta?
What was next was I moved down to Atlanta. I had done Uber on the side to make extra income, and I proceeded to apply everywhere. I did 20 to 30 informational interviews just to try and gauge. Well, because I'm from a big insurance cold calling atmosphere, so it was easy for me to just kind of figure out Google and then just find email addresses and cold email everyone in Atlanta. And so I kind of worked my way through that and ended up applying to a job on NAPFA, which was interesting because I had never really paid attention to NAPFA in Nashville. And so when I moved down here, I had heard that it was a great place to look. So I had applied to a job in NAPFA and got a really awesome job there. The funny thing about that is that I got the job with the idea of behavioral financial planning. That was how I actually won over the guy who hired me, is because I mentioned the behavioral aspect of financial planning being something I'm passionate about, not just the numbers. And that was an amazing experience. They taught me that where I was before was not real financial planning. And that was eye-opening because you as a young person, you have tunnel vision. So whatever they tell you, you're going to believe. So if you believe that your big insurance agency is a financial planning firm because they tell you that's how you sell their service, then you believe that's financial planning. And then when you go to another place and they tell you it's financial planning holistic, but they make, a very large percentage off of variable universal life, sales, well, then is that real financial planning? And then I went to this firm and they taught me the structure of a financial plan, and the process is almost just as important as the numbers that are involved with it and how to cultivate relationships. It was a great, great experience.
I love it. And I kind of had that same experience of, you get in there and once you see what real financial planning is, you almost can never go back.
Oh yeah, 100%.
I don't ever see people going from like fee only comprehensive financial planning to insurance sales. It's just not a transition that we see. And I think that has a lot to do with it because, again, once you kind of see the real thing, you're like, oh man, I can't imagine going back, doing it the way it used to be done.
Yeah. And I almost felt bad because anyone that I had met or sold a policy to from the first job I had to go back and kind of almost apologize and say, hey, if you ever need me to help you with real financial planning, I can help you, but I'm really sorry that I didn't know what I was doing. Because the bad part about that structure, in my opinion, my personal opinion, is that they train kids to go out and sell things to family, friends, and their warm, quote unquote, network. And then what they're paying into those insurance policies, regardless of if it's term or whole life or variable life, that takes away from their financial goals.
Sure.
And so you're having 23, 24, 25-year-olds paying for a whole life policy when they probably should just be putting the money into their 401k or a Roth IRA. And, 40 years down the line, decisions that I made as an insurance salesman are going to be coming to reality. They're going to be resulting at that point. And that just made me feel probably the worst I've ever felt was when I joined that firm and then realized that the last 2 or 3 years of my professional experience could have broken down a family in the future. I mean, it's really heavy. I don't know if you want to get that deep into the psychology of going from one to the other, but it just really kind of weighed on me having a servant mentality and knowing that, I had to apologize and say, I'm sorry that I may have taken $20,000 out of your retirement without knowing, like, how can I help?
It's a really interesting point that you make there, because we always talk about, how it benefits the client or it harms the client in these various situations. But I don't know that I've ever heard anybody actually acknowledge the fact that making the transition, and when you kind of open your eyes and you see the work that you've done or the work that you could have been doing and weren't doing, hopefully it's not so heavy-handed that you actually, ruined a family's finances. But it's kind of a big deal. They don't train you on how to actually manage that. And so I think for the career changers out there, or folks looking to break into the industry, be aware of that there may come some enlightenment. And with that may come the phone call, which I cannot imagine having to make, which is, hey, I sold you the wrong policy. I didn't do right by you. And I would encourage you to come in and let me make it right. Or here's a list of a few people to go talk to so they can make it right, but get out of that policy. I sold you. I didn't know any better. That's a hard conversation to have, because your list, the people you're selling to, are probably friends and family early on. It's hard to just go out and sell an insurance policy to somebody you don't know. So, okay. So you have this amazing opportunity. You're learning comprehensive financial planning at a fee-only firm. They open your eyes to what real financial planning is, but you're not there anymore. So kind of what happened at that firm?
Okay, so this is going to be a long story. I'm trying to cut it short. The midway through, there was an opportunity for a potential merger or acquisition, and it didn't end up happening, but it kind of opened my eyes to there might be other things on the other side of the tunnel. And so in that process, after the merger didn't go through, my boss had met, I think it was Matt Cosgriff, which is so funny how right after he met him and I started my firm, I started seeing Matt everywhere. So I know he's been on the podcast before. And he met Matt Cosgriff at the BFPA conference in Boston a couple years ago. And he also met Brittany Castro and Eric Roberge. And by that time, XY had been on my radar since you guys opened. I had read your posts on Michael's blog. I'd read Sophia Bera's posts on Michael's blog. So I knew to keep a lookout for you guys. So once XY launched, it was in my peripheral, kind of off to the side. But my boss came back and he thought of this great idea to start an intrapreneurship program where he would allow me to build a brand underneath his program and proceed to coach me and mentor me. And the best part about it is that a lot of his clients' kids were now becoming in that 25 to 35 range. And so they were perfect. It was almost low-hanging fruit, like taking candy from a baby, if you will. And so it was a great opportunity for me. And I, of course, embraced it. And when he gave me this opportunity, he said, okay, well, I'm willing to give in this amount of money, put in this amount of money, and you can keep 10% of the company. Looking back on it now, like my company, even with as few clients as it has, just from the IP and structure and the way that I built it, I probably wouldn't sell my company for less than $50K. It would have been a terrible, terrible business decision on my part. But back then I was like, yeah, I need the money. You're going to let me run my own firm under your firm. Sounds like a great plan. I'm going to have basically a client pool of 50 people to kind of recruit and cultivate relationships with. Awesome idea. I know what my split is for revenue purposes. This will be great. But then he brought in someone else to be I think the chief investment officer, and tried to transition some pieces of his practice so that he could stick to doing the more financial planning pieces, more wealth management, more tax planning, those types of pieces. And he got some resistance on that because and I'll get to this later, but his clients kind of viewed him as the person rather than the firm as the person, which is interesting because he hadn't built that culture from the beginning. And so even though when I joined, it was we're a team, our clients know us as a team. When push came to shove and the chips were down, the clients did not believe in the team. They believed in him as a supervisor of the team, but not as the team as a whole. And so he decided, hey, I don't want to fund this anymore. And all this work that you've done to build what we come to know now as Ignite, all this work that you've done, we can't really do anything with it. I have to work on transitioning my clients to more of the team, and I can't fund this. And matter of fact, I think that you've been caring more about building this brand than you have about my clients in the first place. And I don't like that. So I think it'd be a good idea for you to just take the business and run. No strings attached.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, that's how that happened. It was really weird because afterwards I was like, I don't know if I got fired, but I didn't like it. Like, I loved what I was learning, but at the end of the day, I realized it's something that I really want to instill in the culture of my firm is that they were done teaching me. And that is just as bad as someone who's not willing to learn more. Like, willing to coach and willing to be coached are two opposite sides. And I had made enough mistakes and had really concentrated on building this brand because I wanted it to be perfect, that it was just not worth the time to continue training me and building me up and teaching me, how the industry should work and what real financial planning is. And kind of the time ran out. And so that's nothing against them. It's just kind of a realization that I had never come to before, is that there is a case where people can just not be willing to teach you anymore.
You bring up a couple of really interesting points. So first off, Matt Cosgriff, I'm sure you're listening. Awesome job on spreading the word of entrepreneurship.
Oh yeah, he's awesome.
So I have had several conversations with Matt. He's actually going to be speaking at XYPN 16. So he's going to be talking on this topic, debate style with JD Bruce. They're going to be going back to back or kind of head to head on the way Matt's firm is doing it versus the way JD Bruce is doing it at Abacus. Two different models, same end goal of serving younger clients. It just shows how much reach those conversations have sometimes, that Matt probably has absolutely no idea that he had such an influence that there's this firm in Atlanta that rolled out this model because of him, because of a conversation that happened.
Oh, yeah. And I wouldn't have my business if it weren't for Matt, which is a crazy, obviously I wouldn't have my business if it weren't for you, Alan, but I bet he doesn't even realize how many XY members are because of something that he wrote or someone he talked to or just him being present in LifeWise. And that's
such a great point.
Yeah, it's incredible the reach that people have. It blows my mind.
Well, we joked one time about doing how did you kind of get to where you are and start backing into influencers? So you name your number one influencer and then that person names their number one influencer. And what's funny, I think we all end up at Kitsis.
Yeah. As if that was any debate.
It's like the father of bringing us all together. So Michael does not listen to shows he's not on. So otherwise he'd be blushing right now. So, all right. So that's one thing, is recognize that when you're doing something new and interesting, it does have an influence. But one of the things in the presentation that I give on kind of rolling out this model, this entrepreneurship model, is why does this model not work? And your old firm is a classic example of just not being fully committed.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost like a should. Like, he had this conversation and he feels like, I should probably do this in my firm. So they do it, but shoulds never last. It is expensive. You will lose money. If you hire a young planner to come in and build out this model in your firm, you will lose money in the first year or two. It's just a reality. And I get a lot of pushback from advisors. And I think, didn't you lose money your first couple of years when you were starting your business? Like, when you roll out a big initiative like this, it is a big upfront investment. You're going to go backwards just a little bit for a couple of years, but think about the long-term effects. But anyway, so
that's another thing that I when I talk to people. So I wrote an article on the blog not too long ago, and I've gotten emails and from young planners and scheduled a couple of phone calls. And something that I always caution them about is make sure that you know what you're doing and that you separate the business from the financial planning, because they'll start to conflict. And then you'll have to make a decision. Like, do you want to make a good business decision or do you want to make a good financial planning firm decision? Because most people think they're one and the same, but they're actually different. And how you view the goal of your firm is going to decide which one it is. So when people say, oh, yeah, I don't want to lose money over 2 years, but they know that they mentally, logically know that $1 trillion of wealth transfer is coming, but they don't want to lose 20 grand over the next 2 years to potentially make $1 million. Like that
Right.
doesn't mentally make sense, but that's because they're making a financial planning firm decision, not a, hey, I want to be a businessman and I'm going to make a good business decision, because losing 20 grand for 2 years to potentially make $500,000, like that's a no brainer, really.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to do a study on the psychology of planners because, we are built, financial planning is built to mitigate risk. Just as a industry, what we do is we help clients mitigate risk. We don't encourage really big risk taking. A client walks in my office and says, hey, I want to drain all of my accounts. I'm going to liquidate everything. I'm going to mortgage my house to start a business. We say, no, you're not. And yet they're the ones that create, people that are willing to take that risk create huge businesses, or they flop, and that's just part of life. And so I do wonder if financial planners are inherently less risk taking just because of that, or if it just has something to do with just getting caught up in just being a very, very small business. So every dollar out of the business is one less dollar in your pocket. But all right, so you start your firm, and one of the interesting things that you and I talked about are some of the side hustles that you have established. So I just want to talk through that a little bit. What are you doing? Because you weren't I don't know, maybe you're better positioned than I think, but to just go out and start a firm, you hadn't planned this for years and years and saved up tons of money. So you got
to say I wasn't well positioned is the understatement of 2016. You have that on record.
So what did you do, or what are you currently doing kind of from a side hustle perspective to make the dollars and cents work so that your business can be successful?
I'm a very strong believer. I think it comes from where I'm from, of making your own luck. And so once you have a number, it's kind of exactly what we tell our clients. Once you have a number that you know that you need to make in order to achieve your goals, like you just build everything after that number. You chase the number almost as much as you chase the goal, because if you can break it down to dollars and cents, well, once you get $5 away from your goal, like you're $5 away from your goal, that's easy to make up. You can walk in the parking lot and pick up pennies for $5 a month and you hit your goal. So the thing that I did is I realized what my monthly income requirements were, and then I broke down what I would need to do. So I started out like Eric Roberge did. He was a waiter. I did delivery driving. So I started out, kind of the backtrack. I signed up for my LLC for Ignite in November, because I had sent out a survey to about 500 millennials asking them what services do they really want, and also to help us decide on the name, and then to input their emails at the bottom if they wanted to learn more about our firm. So that was kind of how I got started. And I worked for the next 3 months building the firm that they asked for. In that time, before we launched in March, I just started out delivery driving. And then I kept putting out content, kept putting out entrepreneurial content, and then still networking in the startup community, because I'm huge into startups. I joke and say that I'm a financial planner in a startup founder's body. Like I really just think through things through the lens of a startup. And so I just kept kind of meeting people, and it luckily snowballed into an effect of people started asking me to give them meetings to like get strategy advice and get marketing advice and get entrepreneurial advice. And what that culminated in was to, one, start writing for a Medium type publication. And two, it was to just spread my network out. So when I started business consulting, it was a random thing. It was someone saying, I like what you did with Ignite. I love the fact that you started your company by doing a minimum viable product and you didn't even build it yet. You just asked people what you want to do. I want to do that for my company. So how do I do that? And so then it was, okay, well, I guess I can charge you, a few dollars per hour and we'll go from there. And so after doing that once, then they had a friend who works in Nashville, and that person was from Nashville. They had a friend who was also starting an e-commerce business. And they're like, well, it worked for you in financial planning and it worked for my friend in nonprofits. So I wonder if it can work for me in Amazon. So then I started working for her friend. And then it's just kind of like built on that. So as I make more money, I'm able to drop delivery shifts. And that's how I've been doing it. Is I started out delivery driving like 45 to 50 hours a week and working on Ignite like 45 to 50 hours a week. So I was working like 100-hour weeks. And then I just proceeded to pare it down. So as I got more hours in business consulting, I was able to drop shifts here and there. And that's really how I've been building my business. And of course, there are little other things that go along with that. Like I helped someone figure out how to integrate Zapier into their company because they saw me tweet about it a lot. And so that helped. I'm in talks with helping another person actually in the XY Planning Network integrate Zapier into their organization. So my tech savvy, as well as knowing how businesses should work, kind of helped me build a reputation of someone who might actually know what they're talking about.
That's awesome.
And so tweeting, writing, publishing things on LinkedIn, just kind of being someone who gives away content for free, not just on a financial planning side, but on being a business owner has helped me gain clients that I never really even marketed for. Like I never even put myself out there as a business consultant. It was my fiance who said, you might want to add that to your LinkedIn profile since you're getting paid by 2 people to do this.
Sometimes we bring people on, and whenever I invited you to be on the show, your response was, but I'm not far enough in to be on the show yet. You know, I only started in November and it's July. And I wanted to get this part of your story out there because I think once we're 2 and 3, 4 years in, like many of the guests on our show, it starts to look more traditional. It starts to look like, oh, my job is I do financial planning. Maybe I still have a little bit of a side hustle, but ultimately I'm doing planning for my 30 clients and I'm growing. But this is what the first year looks like. And entrepreneurship, business ownership is not easy. And I know sometimes we make it look easy, right? Because you see the success stories. You don't really see the failure stories. You hear me come on the show and tout about, oh, the XY Planning Network give you everything that you need. But the one thing I can't give you is the grit to go out and do exactly what you're doing, which is work a 90, 100-hour week in order to build the business that will support your life.
Mm-hmm. And that's a hustle like thing as well as grit. So being able to be outside of your comfort zone is paramount. That's something that, and also as we discussed over coffee in Montana, is having support of your spouse. Like I have a fiance who was first in graduate school when I first started. So when I launched Ignite in March, she was in grad school. Now she has a full-time job. So she doesn't see me. Like we see each other, I don't know, 6 to 8 hours a week, maybe. And so one day we were talking about it and I was questioning whether I should really be doing this because it doesn't seem like it's working. And she just said, well, Ignite is now that's my vision. Ignite is my dream now. So having that kind of support is paramount.
That's awesome.
And that's something that I tell anyone, whether they're a financial planning startup or they're starting their own business or if they're going into freelancing, if you don't have support from your spouse and the first time that they say it'd probably be easier if you just got a job, like that will kill any resistance that you have to rejection. Because I joke and I say I fail probably 5 to 7 times a day, 5 days a week. Like something that I'm trying to do fails or it doesn't work or I get hung up on or someone sends me a nasty email or, something happens at least 5 times a day. That is, okay, well, I just got punched in the mouth. So am I going to, roll it all up and go get a desk job? Or am I just going to see this through and sees what happens?
What an amazing story he has. I'm thrilled he was able to come on the show and just share his kind of career path and successes as well as his failures. It remains to be seen if his predictions come true in terms of the changing industry, but I suspect he'll be proven right rather quickly. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.